Real quick before I start, if you're the type who listens to these on long hauls or late at night, hit subscribe and smack that like button. Helps the channel out more than you'd think. I tell a new one every Monday and Friday, and drop a comment if you've had something weird happen on the road. I read them. Other drivers do too. Alright, here's how it went.
I've been pulling freight for 23 years now, mostly long-haul runs between the Midwest and anywhere they'll pay me to take a load. Based out of Springfield, Missouri, but I'm on the road more than I'm home. Drive a 2019 Peterbilt 579 with a 53-foot dry van. Nothing fancy, but she runs clean and the payments are manageable. Handles Road Dog. Been using it since I started driving back in '01. This particular run I'm about to tell you about happened in November of last year. Cold snap had been sitting over Kansas for about a week, temperatures dropping down into the teens at night. I was hauling a load of furniture from a warehouse outside Kansas City down to Denver, scheduled to deliver Tuesday morning. Standard freight, nothing special about it except the timing was tight. Dispatcher told me to take I-70 straight west, which is what I always do anyway. That's the most direct route, and the road conditions were decent despite the cold. Left the warehouse around 4:30 Monday afternoon, right as the sun was starting to drop. Figured I'd drive through the night, maybe grab a quick nap at a rest area if I needed it, but more likely just push straight through. It's about a 7-hour drive if you keep moving. And I had plenty of hours on my logbook. Tank was full, truck was running good, and the load was secure. First couple hours went smooth as you'd expect. Rush hour traffic getting out of Kansas City, then it thinned out once I hit the open highway. Had the CB on channel 19 like always, listening to the usual chatter. Couple guys talking about road conditions up ahead. Somebody complaining about a four-wheeler that cut him off. The normal stuff you hear every night out there. Around 7 o'clock, I pulled into a Pilot truck stop outside Salina to top off the tank and grab some dinner. Wasn't really hungry, but I knew it'd be a long night, and I wanted something in my stomach. Got fuel first, then parked over by the restaurant. Place was busy like they usually are on Monday nights. A lot of drivers trying to get their runs started for the week. Waitress was a middle-aged woman named Dolores. Been working there for years. I'd seen her before on other runs. She brought me coffee without me asking, and I ordered the meatloaf special. Food was decent, nothing to write home about, but it was hot and filling. While I was eating, I checked my phone for messages from dispatch, looked over the GPS to make sure I was still on time. Everything looked good. Got back on the road around 8:15. Sun was completely down by then, and the temperature was dropping fast. Could see my breath when I did my post-trip inspection. Checked the trailer doors, kicked the tires, made sure everything was still tight. Climbed back in the cab and fired her up, pulled out onto I-70 westbound. Traffic was light, which I expected for a Monday night in November. Mostly just trucks and the occasional car. CB was quiet too, just the usual position reports and somebody asking about a parking spot at the next truck stop. I settled in for the long haul across Kansas. It's not the most exciting drive in the world, just straight highway through farmland for miles and miles, but I don't mind it. Gives you time to think. Around 10 o'clock, I started hearing some chatter on the CB that caught my attention. Two drivers were talking about some kind of accident up ahead, but when I asked for more details, they said it was old news, something that happened years ago. Didn't think much of it at the time. Drivers like to tell stories, especially on the quiet stretches of road. The first weird thing happened around 11:30. I was maybe 40 miles west of Salina, cruising along at about 65 miles per hour, when my CB crackled to life with a transmission I didn't expect. "Eastbound? You got your ears on?" Voice sounded clear as day, but something about it seemed off. Hard to explain what I mean by that. The tone was normal, the words were normal trucker talk, but there was a quality to it that made me pay attention. Like when you hear an echo in a canyon, except this wasn't an echo. I keyed up my mic. "Yeah, go ahead eastbound." "Westbound, what's your 20? "About mile marker 225, coming up on the Russell exit." Long pause. Static on the radio, but not the usual kind. More like the sound you get when a storm is building. That electric feeling in the air. "Copy that, westbound. Watch yourself through here. Road gets tricky up ahead." I looked at my GPS, then out at the highway. Road looked fine to me, straight and level with good visibility. No construction signs, no weather warnings on the radio. Appreciate it, eastbound. What kind of trouble you talking about? Another pause, this time longer. Bridges out up ahead. Creeks running high. That didn't make sense. I'd driven this stretch of I-70 dozens of times over the years, never seen any creek big enough to worry about. And if there was a bridge out, there'd be construction signs, detour routes, something. But the road ahead looked normal. Eastbound, you sure about that? I'm not seeing any construction signs. No response, just static. I kept driving, but I'll admit I was paying closer attention to the road now. Checked my mirrors, looked for any sign of another truck, but I didn't see any headlights behind me or ahead of me. Whoever had been talking to me on the CB, I couldn't see where they were. About 15 minutes later, right around midnight, another voice came on the radio. Anyone copy the eastbound talking about a bridge? This was a different driver, different voice. Sounded like an older guy, gravelly voice like he'd been smoking for 40 years. I keyed up. Yeah, I heard him. You see any construction signs? I'm not seeing anything. Negative on construction. Been driving this route for 30 years, never heard of any bridge problems through here. You get a handle on that eastbound? Negative, he went quiet on me. The older driver came back. Handles Smokey Joe, driving a blue Kenworth, pulling a reefer. You see me in your mirrors? I checked. No blue Kenworth behind me. Negative, Smokey Joe. You behind me or ahead of me? Should be about 2 miles back. What's your handle, driver? Road Dog, pulling a Pete with a dry van. Copy, Road Dog. Keep your ears on. Something ain't right about that radio traffic. Smokey Joe was right about that. In 23 years of driving, you get a feel for normal CB chatter. Drivers have their own way of talking, their own rhythm. That first transmission had sounded normal on the surface, but thinking back on it, something was off. The phrasing was a little old-fashioned, the way drivers talked back in the 80s and 90s. Not wrong exactly, just not quite current. I kept driving west, watching the mile markers tick by. The highway was still in good shape, no signs of construction or bridge problems, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to stay alert. Around 12:30, a third voice joined the conversation. Y'all talking about the eastbound with the bridge warning? This driver sounded younger, maybe in his 30s. Southern accent, probably from Texas or Oklahoma. Smokey Joe came back first. That's affirmative. You hear him too? Sure did. Asked me about road conditions up ahead, then started talking about high water. Name was Danny something. Driving for Midwest Express. That got my attention. I'd heard of Midwest Express, but I hadn't seen any of their trucks on the road in years. Company went out of business back in the early 90s, if I remembered right. I keyed up. You sure about that company name? Midwest Express? That's what he said. Blue and white tractor pulling a flatbed. Said he was hauling steel out of Pittsburgh. Smokey Joe cut in. Hold on there, young driver. What's your handle? Texas Pete, and I know what I heard. Texas Pete, I've been driving this highway since before you were born, and Midwest Express ain't been around for 20 years. Company folded in 92, maybe 93. Silence on the radio for a long minute. I was starting to get that feeling you get when something's not right, but you can't put your finger on what it is. Like when you smell smoke but can't see the fire. The CB crackled again, and this time it was the original voice. The one that had warned me about the bridge. Westbound, eastbound, you boys still out there? All three of us came back at once, stepping on each other's transmissions. Had to wait for the radio to clear before anyone could talk. I went first. Yeah, eastbound, we're here. What's your 20 now? Just crossed the bridge at Bunker Creek. Water's running fast tonight. Y'all be careful through there. I looked at my GPS again. No Bunker Creek on the map. No bridge marked anywhere in the next 20 miles. Texas Pete came on. Eastbound, what's your handle? And confirm that company name. Handle's Diesel Dan, pulling for Midwest Express. Blue and white Pete with a flatbed loaded with steel beams out of Pittsburgh bound for Denver. Y'all having radio trouble? You're coming through awful weak. Smokey Joe and I looked at each other through the radio, if you know what I mean. That feeling when you realize you're all thinking the same thing, but nobody wants to say it out loud. Diesel Dan, Smokey Joe said, his voice careful and slow. What year you think it is? Pause. Static. November 15th, 1987. Why you ask? The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I glanced at the date on my dashboard display. November 15th, 2023. 36 years to the day. Texas. Pete came back first, voice shaky. Dan, this is gonna sound crazy, but it's 23. November 15th, 2023. Long pause. When Diesel Dan came back, His voice sounded different, confused. That ain't right. Just left Kansas City this afternoon. Got a delivery scheduled for Wednesday morning. I was gripping the steering wheel tighter now, checking my mirrors every few seconds. Still didn't see any other trucks on the road, but that didn't mean much. Highway was dark except for my headlights cutting through the night. Dan, I said, what mile marker are you passing now? Just past 190 coming up on Ellsworth. I checked my GPS. I was at mile marker 201, still about 20 miles from Ellsworth. If Dan was eastbound like he said, and he was at mile marker 190, I should be seeing his headlights by now. Road was straight and flat through here, visibility for miles. Dan, I'm westbound at mile marker 201. I should be seeing your headlights, but I don't see anything. I can see you just fine westbound. White Pete with a dry van. You got a small dent in your front bumper, driver's side. That stopped me cold. He was right about the dent. Hit a deer 2 months ago outside Little Rock. Left a small crease in the chrome bumper. Nothing you'd notice unless you were looking for it, and definitely nothing you could see from the road at night. Smokey Joe came back on, voice tight. This ain't right, boys. Dan, you said Midwest Express? That's right. Driver, that company's been gone for 30 years. And if it's really 1987 where you are, you need to know something. There was an accident on this stretch of highway that year. November 15th. Truck went off the bridge at Bunker Creek. Driver didn't make it. Silence on the radio. Just static in the hum of my engine. When Dan came back, his voice was quieter. What kind of truck? Blue and white Peterbilt. Flatbed loaded with steel beams. Driver's name was Danny Morrison. The silence stretched out for maybe 2 full minutes. I kept driving, but I'll admit I was spooked now. Checked my doors to make sure they were locked, though I couldn't say why. Turned up the heat because I was starting to feel cold despite the cab being warm. That's my name, Dan finally said, so quiet I could barely hear him. Danny Morrison. None of us said anything for a while. What do you say to something like that? I've heard strange stories from other drivers over the years, tales about things they've seen on the road that don't make much sense in daylight. Always figured most of it was just tired drivers seeing things, or maybe stretching the truth to make a better story. But this was different. This was 3 other drivers hearing the same thing I was hearing. Texas. Pete broke the silence. Dan, do you remember what happened, the accident? Started snowing about an hour ago? Not much at first, but it's picking up now. Road's getting slick. Dispatcher wants me to keep rolling, says the weather's supposed to clear up before morning. I looked out my windshield. Clear sky, no snow. Temperature was cold, but no precipitation in the forecast. Dan, it's not snowing here, I said. Sky's clear. Must be a localized system. Happens sometimes in Kansas. Y'all just haven't hit it yet. Smokey Joe came back on. Dan, listen to me careful. If it's really snowing where you are, you need to slow down. Take your time through any bridge sections. Copy that. Bridge is coming up now, maybe half a mile ahead. Can see the warning lights. My GPS showed no bridges in the next 10 miles, nothing but straight highway through farmland. Dan, I said, what warning lights? Construction signs. Bridge work ahead, narrow lanes, gonna have to take it slow through here. Dan, stop the truck. Smokey Joe's voice was urgent now. Pull over and stop. Can't stop on the bridge approach, traffic behind me. What traffic? What do you see behind you? A couple 4-wheelers been following me for the last 10 miles. They're right on my bumper, probably want to pass, but there's no room with the construction. I was getting that sick feeling in my stomach. The kind you get when you know something bad is about to happen and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Dan, listen to me, Texas Pete said. There is no construction. There is no traffic. You need to slow down right now. I can see the bridge now. Narrow lanes, like I said. Left lane's blocked off, got to squeeze through the right lane. These 4-wheelers are still pushing me. Dan, stop the truck. All them 3 of us were shouting into our radios now. Road's real slick here. Truck's sometimes starting to slide. Jesus, I don't think I'm gonna make it through this narrow section. Can't slow down with these cars pushing me. The sound that came over the radio next is something I'll never forget. Squealing brakes, the air horn blowing, and then a sound like metal tearing apart. Lasted maybe 5 seconds, then nothing but static. We all waited, listening to the empty channel. I don't know how long we sat there in silence, but it felt like forever. Finally, Smokey Joe keyed up. Dan, come back. Nothing. Texas Pete tried. Diesel Dan, you copy? Still nothing. I was passing mile marker 210 now, coming up on Ellsworth. Road was still clear, no sign of any accident or construction. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had just happened, even if I couldn't see it. "Boys," Smokey Joe said, "I think we just heard that accident happen." "That's impossible," Texas Pete said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "Is it? We all heard the same thing. All heard him describe details he couldn't have known. That dent on Road Dogg's bumper, the company that's been gone for 30 years. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't come up with any other explanation that made sense. You think he was really there? In 1987? I don't know what I think anymore. But I know what I heard." We drove in silence for a while after that. I kept the CB on and turned up, hoping Dan might come back. But the channel stayed quiet. Just the three of us, checking in with each other every few miles, making sure we were all still there. Around 2 in the morning, Texas Pete called out that he was taking the exit for the truck stop at Wakini. Said he needed to stop and think about what we'd heard. Smokey Joe said he was going to keep rolling, but he'd stay on Channel 19 for a while longer. I decided to push on toward Denver. Part of me wanted to stop and call it a night, but another part of me wanted to get through Kansas as fast as possible. About 20 minutes after Texas Pete signed off, the CB crackled again. "Westbound, you got your ears on?" Same voice, same tone. Danny Morrison calling like nothing had happened. This time, I didn't answer right away. "Let Smokey Joe take it." "Yeah, eastbound, go ahead." Road conditions clearing up now. Snow's stopping, but it's left a sheet of ice on the bridges. "Y'all watch yourselves through here." "Dan, is that you?" "That's right. Diesel Dan, Midwest Express." "Dan, we thought we lost you there for a while." Pause. "Lost me? Nah, I just been fighting this weather. Truck slid around pretty good on that bridge back there, but I got her straightened out. Scared the hell out of me, though." Smokey Joe and I both keyed up at the same time, stepping on each other. Had to wait for the channel to clear. "Dan," I said, "you made it across the bridge?" "Just barely. Like I said, truck started sliding, thought I was going to lose it. But I managed to get her straight and made it across. Shook me up pretty good, though." "What happened to the cars behind you?" Smokey Joe asked. "What cars? You said there were four-wheelers pushing you." Long pause. "I don't remember any cars. Been pretty much alone out here since I left Kansas City." I felt the cold creeping up my spine again. "Dan, a few minutes ago, you said you were having trouble on the bridge. Sounded like you didn't make it." "Must have been radio trouble. This old CB has been acting up lately, cutting in and out. Sometimes I think I'm transmitting, but maybe I'm not." Smokey Joe came back. "Dan, what time you got?" "Coming up on 2:30. I checked my clock. 2:27 a.m., November 15th, 2023. "Dan, what year?" Another long pause. "Why do you boys keep asking me that?" "November 15th, 1987, Monday night. Dan, this is Smokey Joe. I need you to listen to me real careful. It's not 1987, it's 2023. You're not where you think you are." "That's crazy talk. I just left Kansas City 6 hours ago." "Dan, do you remember the bridge? What really happened on the bridge?" The radio went quiet for maybe 5 minutes. I kept driving, checking my mirrors, looking for some sign of another truck, but seeing nothing. The highway was empty except for my headlights cutting through the darkness. When Dan came back, his voice was different, softer, confused. I remember sliding. The truck started to jackknife, and I couldn't get it back. Hit the guardrail and went over the side. Water was real cold. None of us said anything. "Am I dead?" What do you say to a question like that? I'm a truck driver, not a preacher or a psychiatrist. I haul freight from point A to point B and try to do it safely. But here I was, talking on the CB radio to a man who died 36 years ago. "I don't know, Dan," Smokey Joe said finally, "but I think maybe you are." That would explain some things, like why I can't seem to get warm and why the load feels so light, and why I keep making the same run over and over. The same run, Kansas City to Denver, steel beams, same load, same route, every night. Never seems to end. I was passing mile marker 250 now, getting close to the Colorado border. Part of me wanted to keep driving, get out of Kansas and put this whole thing behind me. But another part of me felt like I owed it to Dan to keep talking to help him understand what was happening. "Dan, how many times you made this run?" "I don't know. Feels like hundreds, maybe thousands. Always starts the same way, leaving Kansas City in the afternoon, driving through the night. Always ends the same way too, with the bridge and the ice and the slide. But not tonight, Smokey Joe said. Tonight you made it across. Yeah, first time I can remember making it across. What was different? Long pause. Static on the radio, but not the harsh kind from before. Softer, like a radio station fading out as you drive away from it. Y'all were there, talking to me, warning me about the bridge. Other times radio's been quiet. Just me alone in the dark. I felt something in my chest, a tightness I couldn't explain. Dan, where are you now? Still heading west, just past Oakley. Road's clear now, no more ice. That was impossible. If he was eastbound like he'd said earlier and he was at Oakley, he'd have to pass me to get there. I was at mile marker 260, and Oakley was still ahead of me. Dan, I thought you were eastbound. Was eastbound. Turned around after I made it across the bridge. Figured if I made it this far, might as well finish the run. Deliver the load like I was supposed to. The radio was getting fainter now, Dan's voice harder to hear, like he was driving away from us in more ways than one. Dan, you still there? Still here. But I think I'm fading out. Radio's getting weak. Dan, before you go, I need to ask you something. Why tonight? Why after all these years? Very faint now, barely audible over the static. Don't know. Maybe because it's the anniversary. Or maybe because somebody finally heard me. Been calling for help on this radio for a long time. Nobody ever answered before. We hear you, Dan. I know. Thank you for that. Dan, what happens now? The static was getting louder, his voice weaker. I think I get to finish the run. Deliver the load. Maybe after that I can rest. Good luck, Dan. Y'all drive safe out there. Watch for ice on them bridges. The radio went quiet after that. Not just quiet, but a different kind of quiet. Like when a radio station goes off the air and you're left with nothing but empty frequency. I tried calling for him a few more times, and so did Smokey Joe, but we didn't get any response. Around 4 in the morning, Smokey Joe signed off at the truck stop in Goodland. Said he needed to get some sleep and think about what we'd heard. I kept rolling west, crossing into Colorado just as the sky started to lighten up in the east. Delivered my load in Denver Tuesday morning, right on schedule. Dispatcher didn't ask about the trip, and I didn't volunteer any information. What would I have said? That I spent half the night talking to a dead truck driver on the CB radio? Nobody would have believed it, and I wouldn't have blamed them. On the way back east, I stopped at a truck stop outside Hayes and used their internet to look up information about Midwest Express. Found an old newspaper article from November 16th, 1987. Truck driver killed in bridge accident. Danny Morrison, age 34, of Independence, Missouri. Driving a blue and white Peterbilt, pulling a flatbed loaded with steel beams. Truck slid on ice, crossing a bridge over Bunker Creek, went through the guardrail and into the water. Driver was found dead in the cab 3 days later. The article said it was the third fatal accident on that bridge in 5 years. County decided to replace it with a wider, safer span. New bridge opened in 1989. The old bridge was demolished. I looked at the GPS on my phone, tried to find Bunker Creek on the map. It's there, all right, about 10 miles east of where I first heard Dan's voice on the radio. But there's no bridge marked on the current maps. The new bridge is 2 miles south of the old location, part of a road improvement project that rerouted that section of I-70. So Dan was trying to cross a bridge that doesn't exist anymore. On a road that was abandoned 30 years ago. Makes as much sense as anything else about that night. I've made that run across Kansas maybe a dozen times since then. Always keep my CB on channel 19, always listen for Dan's voice. Haven't heard him again though. Part of me hopes I don't. If what he said was true, if he finally got to deliver that load, maybe he's at rest now. But part of me hopes I do hear from him again, just so I know he made it. Truckers look out for each other on the road, help each other when we can, even if one of us has been dead for 36 years. I still talk to Smokey Joe on the radio sometimes when we cross paths. Neither one of us mentions that night, unless we're sure nobody else is listening. Texas Pete. I haven't heard from since. Could be he changed his handle, or maybe he decided to find a different line of work. Can't say I'd blame him. Thing is, after 23 years of driving, you think you've seen everything the road has to offer. Good weather and bad weather, easy loads and difficult loads, nice people and jerks, mechanical problems and smooth sailing. You get comfortable with the routine, figure there aren't many surprises left. But the road's got more secrets than any of us realize. Things that happened years ago that maybe aren't quite finished yet. Places where the past and present get tangled up together like CB radio signals bouncing off the atmosphere. I don't claim to understand what happened that night. Don't know if Dan was really there, or if it was some kind of radio phenomenon I'd never heard of before. But I know what I heard, and I know Smokey Joe and Texas Pete heard it too. 3 witnesses to something that shouldn't have been possible. Maybe that's enough. Maybe Dan just needed somebody to witness what happened to him, to hear his story, and know that he tried his best to make it across that bridge. Maybe that's all any of us really want in the end. For somebody to know we were here, that we did our job and tried to do it right. I still drive that stretch of I-70 through Kansas, still haul loads between Kansas City and Denver when the dispatcher offers them. Road looks the same as it always did, straight and flat through miles of farmland. But now when I'm driving through there at night, I pay closer attention. Keep the CB turned up a little louder. Watch for ice on the bridges, even when the weather's clear, because you never know who might be out there trying to make their way home. All right, one more for the road. Different run, different rig. Here's how this one went. I've been running the eastern seaboard for the better part of 15 years now, mostly between Atlanta and up through the Carolinas to Virginia, sometimes pushing as far north as Baltimore, if the rate's right. Name's Rick Saunders, handles Carolina Wind. Been using that since I got my CDL back in '09. Drive a 2017 Freightliner Cascadia with a 53-foot reefer unit. Keep her maintained regular, and she's been good to me. Based out of Charlotte, but like most of us, I'm home maybe 6 days a month if I'm lucky. What I'm about to tell you happened this past March, right around the middle of the month when the weather was starting to turn but hadn't quite made up its mind yet. Spring in the Carolinas can be tricky like that. Warm during the day, cold enough at night to make you think winter's not done with you yet. I was hauling a load of frozen seafood from a processing plant down in Brunswick, Georgia, up to a distribution center outside Richmond, Virginia. Temperature had to stay at exactly -10 degrees the whole way, which meant keeping that reefer unit humming and not taking any chances with delays. Dispatcher was a guy named Tommy Valdez, worked the overnight shift at the company I was leasing on with at the time. Good dispatcher, knew the routes, didn't overbook you or stick you with loads that couldn't make money. He called me around 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday, said he had a run that needed to leave that evening. Rick, you available for a quick turnaround? Got seafood out of Brunswick, needs to be in Richmond by Saturday morning. I was sitting in my truck at a TA outside Macon, just finished delivering a load of textiles to a warehouse there. Had been planning to take a 34-hour reset, maybe get a real shower and catch up on some sleep, but the rate he quoted me was too good to pass up. Yeah, I can take it. What time's the pickup? 6:30 tonight. Load's already palletized and ready to go. Should have you loaded and rolling by 7:15 if everything goes smooth. I looked at my watch. 2:15. That gave me enough time to grab some dinner, maybe a quick nap, and still make it down to Brunswick in plenty of time. Brunswick's about 2.5 hours southeast of Macon, right on the coast. Pretty area if you're into that kind of thing, but I was more concerned with getting loaded and getting back on the road. All right, send me the load details. I'll be there. Tommy texted me the shipper information and the delivery address. Standard stuff, nothing that looked complicated. I fired up the truck and headed south on I-75, then picked up US 82 east toward I-95. Route was familiar enough. I'd run freight down to the Georgia coast plenty of times over the years. Made good time getting down there. Traffic wasn't too bad for a Thursday afternoon, just the usual mix of commuters and other commercial vehicles. CB was quiet mostly. A couple guys talking about construction on I-16, but nothing that affected my route. Weather was clear. Temperature running in the low 60s, nice driving conditions. Got to the seafood plant right at 6:20. Place was bigger than I'd expected. A lot of dock doors and plenty of room to maneuver a truck. Backed up to door 12 like they'd told me and shut her down. Reefer was already pre-cooled to -10, ready to take the load. Dock worker was a young Hispanic guy, maybe early 20s, moved with the kind of efficiency you see in people who've been doing the job for a while, even if they haven't been doing it for long. You, Rick? Carolina Wind? That's me? Good. We're ready for you. 26 pallets of mixed seafood, mostly shrimp and scallops. Weight's good at 42,800 pounds. Should have you loaded in about 40 minutes. I appreciated that he knew the weight off the top of his head. Shows they were paying attention, not just throwing freight at you and hoping for the best. While they loaded, I walked around the truck, checked the tires, looked under the trailer for anything that might cause problems down the road. Everything looked good. By 7:10, I was sealed up and ready to roll. Got my paperwork from the shipping office, signed the bills, checked the reefer one more time to make sure it was holding temperature. -9 degrees, well within spec. Some drivers get nervous hauling frozen freight, worried about the unit going down and losing the whole load. But I'd been doing it long enough that it didn't bother me much. You keep your equipment maintained and you check your temperatures regular. Usually everything works out fine. Called dispatch while I was still in the parking lot. "Tommy, it's Rick. Loaded and rolling out of Brunswick. Everything looks good." "Copy that. How's your drive time looking?" I did the math in my head. Brunswick to Richmond is about 400 miles, most of it on I-95 through some decent-sized cities. Savannah, Charleston, Fayetteville, Raleigh. If I pushed straight through, I could make it in about 7 hours, but that would put me there around 2 in the morning, and they weren't open for deliveries until 6. I'm thinking I'll drive up to the Carolinas, maybe grab some sleep at a truck stop around Fayetteville, then finish the run in the morning. That work for you? "Yeah, that's fine. Delivery appointments not until 8 a.m. anyway, so you got plenty of time." I pulled out of the plant and headed north toward I-95. Sun was just starting to set, which meant I'd be driving through the night anyway, even if I stopped in Fayetteville. I prefer night driving when I can get it. Less traffic, cooler temperatures, and something about the rhythm of the road at night that helps me think. First part of the run went exactly like you'd expect. Picked up I-95 north and settled into the right lane. Cruise control set at 60 miles per hour. Reefer was running smooth, temperature holding steady. CB had the usual chatter, drivers talking about fuel prices, somebody complaining about a dispatcher, a couple guys comparing notes on truck stops up ahead. Passed through Savannah around 8:15. Always liked that city, something about the old architecture and the Spanish moss hanging off the trees. But I didn't have time for sightseeing. Stayed on I-95 and kept pushing north. Traffic wasn't too bad. Typical mix of cars heading home from work and trucks running freight up and down the coast. Around 9:30, I started getting hungry, so I pulled into a pilot just south of Charleston to grab some fuel and something to eat. Place was busy like they usually are, a lot of trucks coming and going. Fuel Island was crowded, but I found an open pump, topped off both tanks, and checked the reefer unit while the diesel was flowing. Everything still looked good. Temperature was holding at -10. Fuel level in the reefer tank was about 3/4 full. No alarms showing on the display. One thing about hauling frozen freight, you get into the habit of checking that unit every time you stop. Lose your temperature and you lose your load, simple as that. Went inside to pay for the fuel and grab some dinner. Picked up a couple of those roller grill hot dogs and a big coffee. Nothing fancy, but it would keep me going. Cashier was a middle-aged woman with a thick South Carolina accent, friendly enough. "Y'all be careful out there tonight, honey. Weather's supposed to get a little nasty up north." I hadn't heard anything about weather on the CB, so I asked her what she meant. "Oh, they're talking about some fog rolling in around Fayetteville. Maybe some light rain. Nothing too serious, but you know how it is." I thanked her and headed back out to the truck. Checked my weather app while I was walking, and sure enough, there was a chance of fog and scattered showers across central North Carolina later that night. Not unusual for March, and nothing I hadn't driven through plenty of times before. Fog can slow you down, but it's not dangerous if you're paying attention and keep your speed reasonable. Got back on I-95 and continued north. Past Charleston around 10:15, still making good time. Traffic had thinned out some, mostly just trucks and the occasional car. CB chatter had died down too, which was fine with me. Sometimes I like the conversation, but sometimes you just want to drive and think. Somewhere around the South Carolina-North Carolina border, I started noticing the fog the cashier had mentioned. Nothing dramatic at first, just a light haze that made the headlights from oncoming traffic look a little softer than usual. But as I kept driving north, it gradually got thicker, until I had to drop my speed down to about 55 and turn on my fog lights. Fog doesn't bother me much usually. I've driven through plenty of it over the years, and as long as you slow down and keep your distance, From other vehicles, it's manageable. But this fog had a different quality to it somehow. Thicker than normal, and it seemed to move in strange patterns in my headlights. I'd see what looked like clear road ahead, then drive into a wall of fog so thick I could barely see the lines on the pavement. By the time I got to the Lumberton area, it was getting pretty heavy. I was down to about 40 miles per hour and having to really concentrate to stay in my lane. The reefer was still running fine. I could hear it cycling on and off behind me, but the fog was making everything else difficult. That's when I started noticing the other trucks. First one I saw was maybe a quarter mile ahead of me, just a glimpse of taillights through the fog. Looked like another semi, which made sense since I-95 through North Carolina is a major freight corridor. But something about those taillights didn't look quite right. They seemed too dim or maybe too spread apart, hard to say exactly what was off about them. I followed those lights for maybe 10 minutes, keeping what I figured was a safe distance. But the fog kept shifting, and sometimes the lights would disappear completely, then reappear somewhere else. Sometimes ahead of me, sometimes off to the side, like they were changing lanes, even though I never saw any turn signals. Finally, I got on the CB to see if anyone else was having the same problem. Breaker 19, this is Carolina Wind, northbound, on I-95 around mile marker 20. Anybody else dealing with this fog? Took a few seconds, then I got a response. Yeah, Carolina Wind, this is Diesel Dan about 2 miles ahead of you. This stuff's pretty thick up here too. Been following some taillights for the last few miles, but can't seem to catch up to them. That got my attention. I was following taillights too, and from what I could tell, they were staying the same distance ahead of me, no matter how I adjusted my speed. Copy that, Diesel Dan. What kind of taillights you seeing? Hard to say. Look like a truck, but something's not right about them. You seeing the same thing? 10-4. Been following some lights for about 10 minutes now. They don't move like a normal truck. A third voice came on the channel, sounded like an older driver. This is Moondog. I'm southbound about mile marker 25. Y'all need to be careful through there. Seen some strange stuff in this fog tonight. I keyed the mic. What kind of strange stuff, Moondog? Trucks that ain't trucks, if you know what I mean. Lights where lights shouldn't be. Been driving this route for 30 years and I ain't never seen nothing like it. That made the hair on my arms stand up a little. I don't spook easy. Been driving long enough to see all kinds of weird stuff on the highway at night. Drunk drivers, people driving without headlights, cars broken down in strange places. But when an old-timer like Moondog says he's never seen anything like it, that's worth paying attention to. I was still following those taillights, and now that I was really focusing on them, I could see what the other drivers were talking about. They didn't move like a normal vehicle. Most trucks have a certain rhythm to how they move down the highway. Little corrections for wind, slight movements left and right as the driver stays centered in the lane. These lights moved perfectly straight like they were on rails, and they were definitely staying the same distance ahead of me, no matter what I did with my speed. I tried slowing down to 35 and they seemed to slow down too. Sped back up to 45 and they sped up to match. That's not how traffic normally works, especially in fog this thick. The reefer unit behind me cycled on again, and I used that as an excuse to check my mirrors. Sometimes you can see things in your mirrors that you miss looking straight ahead, especially at night. But all I could see was a fog and the glow of my own taillights reflecting back at me. By this time I was getting close to Fayetteville, which was where I'd planned to stop for the night anyway. But the fog wasn't getting any better, and those lights ahead of me were starting to make me nervous in a way I couldn't quite explain. I'd been planning to push onto a truck stop north of town, but I started thinking maybe I should just find the first place I could park and wait for morning. Diesel Dan came back on the radio. Carolina Wind, you still there? Yeah, I'm here. Still following those lights. Mine just disappeared. 1 second they were there, next second they were gone. Fog didn't get any thicker, they just vanished. I looked ahead and mine were still there. Still that same distance ahead. Still moving in that perfectly straight line that didn't look natural. Mine are still there, I said into the mic. Well, be careful, driver. Something ain't right about this whole situation. He was right about that. I'd been driving in fog plenty of times before, and I'd never seen anything like what was happening that night. Lights that moved wrong, stayed the same distance away no matter what you did, and apparently could just disappear without any explanation. I started looking for an exit where I could get off I-95 and find someplace to park until morning. There's a big truck stop at exit 56 just south of Fayetteville, place I'd stopped at before. Clean showers, decent restaurant, plenty of parking. If I could make it there, I could shut down for the night and let this fog clear out. But as I got closer to that exit, something strange happened. The fog started getting thicker instead of thinner, until I could barely see 50 feet ahead of my bumper, and those taillights I'd been following started moving differently. Instead of staying straight ahead in my lane, they began drifting to the right, toward what should have been the shoulder of the highway. I slowed down even more, trying to figure out what was happening. If it was a real truck having problems, maybe pulling over with mechanical trouble, I wanted to give them plenty of room. But as I watched, the lights kept moving right, further than any shoulder would extend, until they were completely off the highway and moving through what looked like empty field. That's when I knew for certain that whatever I'd been following wasn't a normal vehicle. I kept driving straight, ignoring the lights that were now moving parallel to the highway about 100 yards to my right. My hands were gripping the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles were white, and I could feel sweat on my forehead despite the fact that it was probably 50 degrees outside. The reefer cycled on again behind me, and that familiar sound was actually comforting. Something normal, something mechanical and predictable in a situation that had stopped making sense. I checked the temperature display, and still minus 10 degrees, load was fine. Finally, I saw the green sign for exit 56, barely visible through the fog. I put my turn signal on and started slowing down for the off-ramp, checking my mirrors to make sure nobody was behind me. Last thing I needed was to get rear-ended because someone couldn't see my brake lights in time. The off-ramp curved to the right, away from whatever those lights were doing out in the field, and as I came around the curve, the fog started to thin out a little. Not much, but enough that I could see the truck stop up ahead, its signs glowing through the haze like a beacon. I'd never been so happy to see a pilot truck stop in my life. Pulled into the fuel island, even though my tanks were still pretty full from Charleston. I wanted to check the truck over, make sure everything was normal, and I needed a few minutes to settle my nerves. The fog was still thick, but not nearly as bad as it had been on the highway. While I was fueling, I got back on the CB to see if I could raise Diesel Dan or any of the other drivers who'd been dealing with the same thing. Breaker 19, this is Carolina Wind at the pilot at exit 56. Anybody else make it through that fog? Took a minute, but Diesel Dan came back. Carolina Wind, this is Diesel Dan. I'm at the TA about 10 miles north of you. Made it through, but I ain't never seen nothing like that in 30 years of driving. Copy that. Those lights I was following went off into a field somewhere around mile marker 52. Just kept going straight into nothing. Yeah, that's about when mine disappeared too. Moondog, you still out there? Moondog's voice came through, sounding shaky. I'm here, just pulled into a rest area, south of Lumberton. Boys, I've been driving this highway since before you were born, and I'm telling you that wasn't normal. Whatever we saw tonight, it wasn't trucks. None of us said anything for a minute. What do you say to something like that? We were all professional drivers, guys who'd seen everything there was to see on the highway. But we'd all experienced something that night that didn't fit into any category we knew about. Finally, Diesel Dan keyed his mic. Well, I don't know what it was, but I'm shutting down for the night. Fog's still too thick up here to drive safe anyway. Same here, I said. Carolina Wind's going off the air. Y'all be safe out there. I finished fueling and found a parking spot in the back of the lot, away from the main building. Checked the reefer one more time. Still running perfect, temperature holding steady. Whatever had happened on the highway, at least my load was safe. Went inside to use the restroom and grab a shower. The pilot was busy like they usually are, late at night, drivers coming and going. But everything felt normal again. Bright lights, familiar sounds, people talking about normal things like fuel prices and delivery schedules. I didn't mention what had happened to anyone inside. What would I have said? That I'd been following ghost taillights through the fog? That they'd driven off the highway into a field and kept going? It sounded crazy even to me, and I'd lived through it. Got my shower and headed back to the truck. The fog was still there, but it seemed less threatening now. More like normal weather and less like something that was hiding things that shouldn't be there. I climbed into the sleeper berth and tried to get some rest, but every time I started to drift off, I'd think about those lights moving perfectly straight, never wavering, never showing any sign that there was a human driver making the small corrections that keep a truck on the road. Must have finally fallen asleep around 3 in the morning, because the next thing I knew, my alarm was going off at 6:30. Fog had cleared out completely, typical North Carolina morning, with clear skies and decent temperature. Everything looked normal in the daylight. Checked the reefer first thing. Still minus 10 degrees. Load was fine. Did my pre-trip inspection, everything on the truck looked good. It was like the night before had been a bad dream. Except I knew it had really happened. Got back on I-95 north toward Richmond, and the rest of the trip went exactly like you'd expect. Normal traffic, normal CB chatter, no problems. Delivered the load on time. Paperwork was correct. Customer was happy. Professional driver doing a professional job. But I kept thinking about those lights all the way up to Virginia. And when I got back to Charlotte a few days later, I did some research on the internet about strange sightings on I-95 through North Carolina. Turns out I wasn't the first driver to see unexplained lights in that area, especially during foggy conditions in March and April. Found several posts on trucking forums from drivers describing similar experiences. Lights that moved wrong, stayed the same distance away, disappeared without explanation. Most of them were reluctant to talk about it, afraid other drivers would think they were crazy or maybe had fallen asleep at the wheel. One post stood out to me. It was from a driver with the handle Phantom Express, and he claimed to have been seeing the same lights off and on for 15 years, always in the same general area between Lumberton and Fayetteville, always during heavy fog conditions. He had a theory about what they might be. Said that stretch of I-95 was built over an old freight railroad line that had been abandoned back in the 1960s. According to him, there had been several train wrecks on that line over the years, including one really bad one in 1963 where a freight train carrying refrigerated goods had derailed during a fog bank and killed the engineer. Could have been coincidence. Could have been just another driver with too much imagination and too much time on his hands. But it made me think about those lights I'd followed, how they moved like they were on rails instead of on a highway. I still run that route sometimes, usually during the day now if I can manage it. Haven't seen those lights again, but I've talked to 3 other drivers over the past year who described similar experiences. Always the same area, always during fog, always lights that don't move like normal vehicles. Last month, I was having coffee with another driver at a truck stop outside Charlotte, a guy named Eddie, who's been running the eastern seaboard even longer than I have. I told him about what I'd seen, and he just nodded like it was something he'd heard before. Yeah, I know that stretch of road, he said. Lost a good friend there about 10 years ago. Truck went off the highway during a fog bank right around mile marker 52. Never did figure out exactly what happened. Road was straight, conditions weren't that bad, but his truck was found about 100 yards off the highway like he'd just kept driving straight into the field. I didn't ask any more questions after that. Some things are better left alone. These days, when I take a load up I-95 and the weather forecast shows fog in central North Carolina, I'll take a different route. I-77 north to I-85, then pick up I-95 further up in Virginia. Adds about 50 miles to the trip and costs me some fuel money, but it's worth it for the peace of mind. I still drive nights when I have to, still haul reefer loads, still run the same routes I always have. But I pay more attention to things that don't seem quite right, and I trust my instincts when something feels off. Been driving long enough to know that the highway can show you things that don't fit into the normal categories, things that are better avoided than investigated. That load of seafood made it to Richmond just fine, by the way. Customer never knew how close they came to having their driver disappear into a fog bank following lights that probably weren't lights at all.